At 7:05 a.m. on August 27th, Russia initiated a naval maneuver that in less than 10 minutes would leave the nation both stunned and deeply humiliated. Located 62.1 miles from the Lofoten Islands in the North Atlantic Ocean near the entrance to the Barents Sea. From the ocean's depths, Russia's Yasen-M nuclear submarine launched the VA-111 Shkval, a supersonic monster of a torpedo famously advertised as Usain Bolt but a dolphin with explosives. Reaching nearly 230 miles per hour, it carved a long white trail across the surface, as if someone had frothed milk in the ocean's massive coffee cup. Its target was none other than the USS Gerald R. Ford, America's $13.3 billion and 100,000-ton aircraft carrier, a veritable floating skyscraper. In the U.S. Fleet's Combat Information Center, radar screens blared with alarms flashing faster than a Monday morning blink. A tiny red dot, the Shkval was rapidly closing in. News instantly spread across the fleet, transforming the atmosphere from leisurely afternoon tea to a guitar string about to snap. Yet in a plot twist more thrilling than a Marvel movie, the Shkval, instead of fulfilling its destructive potential, merely grazed the forward side akin to a botched drift from Fast and Furious. America sustained no damage beyond a few spilled coffee cups from the wake. For Russia, the show of force became an international farce, burning both funds and reputation. The Shkval, meant to be a star, ended up a fleeting, forgettable character. But the show was far from over. As the torpedo's foam dissipated, the USS Indiana's sonar pinpointed the origin of the stunt, the Yasen-M submarine trembling 40 nautical miles northeast of the U.S. formation, lurking at nearly 1,000 feet deep. Suddenly, the Ford's alarm klaxons shrieked, snapping every sailor to attention. The Ford's cutting-edge SPY-6 radar detected another massive steel vessel barreling towards them. The Marshal Ustinov, Russia's 12 500-ton Slava-class cruiser, bristling with 16 P-500 Basalt anti-ship missiles. Each shipwreck missile carried enough destructive power to turn a carrier strike group into a floating junkyard. The Russian Navy's actions were clearly an act of direct, unprovoked aggression, and in the proud tradition of the U.S. Navy, it would be simply impolite not to respond in kind. With the order given, the crew of the USS Thomas Hudner ready to rum 139 VL ASROC. This advanced weapon wasn't for direct fire. Instead, it launched into the air to deploy a torpedo. That torpedo would then slam into the sea at over 46 miles per hour. Its final mission was to sweep deep to lock on to the unique acoustic signature of the Russian submarine. Today is an unlucky day for Russia. After launching its Shkval torpedo, the Yasen-M submarine suffered a critical malfunction. The ship's cooling system had failed, slowing it down. It could no longer escape and needed to retreat to Murmansk Naval Base Severomorsk. But it also knew with a certainty that must have chilled its crew to the bone that the U.S. wouldn't simply stand by and watch. And that's when Russia played its backup card. The cruiser Marshal Ustinov roared forward, pushing 32 miles per hour straight at the U.S. formation. Its massive top-dome radar lit up and locked directly onto the USS Ford. Every console on the American ship flashed red. This wasn't a warning, it was a challenge. A desperate move, a steel shield thrown up to cover the crippled submarine slipping into the northern shadows. In the command compartment, the seasoned Navy officers quickly deduced Russia's desperate situation. The order to cease the missile launch was given. There was no need to waste precious resources on an enemy in hasty retreat, one already crippled by its own recklessness. The USS Ford fleet's target shifted. The Russian cruiser, now fully exposed, became the new focal point. The moment the SPY-6 alerted fire control locked, the Combat Information Center on the USS Ford understood Russia wasn't truly going to press the button, at least not yet. But complacency is a luxury no warship can afford. Americans never stand idly by waiting for incoming fire. All preparations for the worst-case scenario were still being made with a quiet, steely resolve. The order crackled over the comms. 4 FA-18E Super Hornets thundered off the deck one after another every 30 seconds, a new jet clawing into the sky. Engines roared, afterburners lit the dawn. Each Hornet carried teeth, AIM-120Ds, Sidewinder's harms, ready to strike. Seconds later, the fleet's eyes took flight. An E-2D Hawkeye lifted off its radar dish, spinning like a giant eye in the sky. From above, it began painting the full battlefield, feeding every detail straight to the strike group below. Under the sea, the submarine USS Indiana changed course. diving more than 476 feet into the depths of the ocean. From its stern, it released a specialized sonar device like an electronic eye tracking the damaged Russian submarine. Meanwhile, on the surface, 2 U.S. warships, the USS Ramage and the USS Thomas Hudner, broke away from the main formation. They surged to the flanks, deploying an impenetrable Aegis shield to protect the aircraft carrier USS Ford. Each ship shifted into combat readiness, its SM-2 and ESSM missile launchers locked on target. Now, if the Ustinov were to launch even a single missile, the Aegis system would respond instantly, a lightning strike so fast. But the threat wasn't just below the surface. The confrontation had now reached the sky. As soon as the threat from the sea was recorded, the cold gray sky over the North Atlantic erupted. 2 Su-35S jets, agile predators of the Russian Air Force, swooped down from the far north, roaring at dangerously low altitudes. These were elite pilots flying some of Russia's most advanced fighters. The arrival of those 2 Su-35S jets wasn't just a dramatic entrance, it was pure misdirection, a big, noisy distraction. It was Russia's desperate attempt to create a smokescreen, turning the sky into a theatrical performance to hide the limping Yasen submarine, which was still trying to ghost its way back to Kola after its little oopsie below the waves. One Russian pilot, clearly a fan of dramatic flare, cut dangerously across the bow of a Super Hornet. Meanwhile, his wingman, less interested in aerial ballet and more in causing actual trouble, instantly locked his IRST radar onto the EA-18G Growler that had been deployed by the U.S. Navy as soon as the Russian planes appeared. Missile lock. Missile lock. The warning lights screamed on Growler's console, flashing an angry, urgent red. Well, isn't this just a fantastic way to start the day? Growler pilot muttered, already thumbing controls, preparing to give the Russians a taste of their own electronic medicine. Just seconds later, an R-73 missile streaked from a Su-35S, its white smoke trail tearing through the Arctic sky. The Super Hornet pilot, with reflexes honed by countless hours of training, immediately deployed flares, turning sharply at a bone-jarring 8 Gs. The R-73, fooled by the false heat signature, plunged harmlessly into the empty air before exploding into a distant, harmless fireball. But the Americans were not passive. An AAM-9X Sidewinder, a heat-seeking predator, left the wing of an FA-18 heading straight for the Russian Su-35S. In an instant, the Russian pilot performed a heart-stopping loop, continuously deploying flares in a desperate attempt to evade. The Sidewinder, momentarily confused, lost its lock, plummeting into the sea to explode in a column of white smoke. Suddenly, a Russian Su-35 separated from the formation, descended to a low-altitude alert level just 197 feet above the water. Then it performed a high-speed flyover right over the USS Thomas Hudner, less than 492 feet from the ship's side. The whole ship shook. The sailors were stunned. This was no longer a joke, but a blatant provocation. Inside the Hudner's CIC, the SLQ-32 electronic warfare suite went into overdrive. It wasn't just tracking the Su-35's radar anymore, it was recording it. Every pulse, every signal, every flicker of energy was logged, building a unique digital fingerprint of the Russian jet. Next time, the Americans wouldn't just see a blip on the screen. They'd know exactly which plane was flying and what it could do. From the very beginning, Russia made a classic mistake, picking a fight with the U.S. Navy in its own backyard. It was a bit like bringing a knife to a gunfight if the gun was a fleet of warships and fighter jets. The U.S. had more than enough firepower, and they had the know-how to do 2 things at once: hunt a Russian submarine below the waves while completely dominating the air above. It was a show of force that Russia just couldn't compete with. In the freezing ocean, the USS Indiana dragged its sonar array deep behind it, a giant underwater microphone. Above British and Norwegian P-8 Poseidons dropped sonobuoys by the dozen, splashing across the sea like a net tightening around prey. These buoys weren't blind. Some pinged the depths, others listened in silence. Together they formed an invisible grid, feeding real-time data back to the fleet. Every swirl, every hum, every metallic groan from the Yasen-M was mapped. The ocean is vast, but for the Russian sub, there was nowhere left to hide. High above, the E-2D Hawkeye watched everything like a referee with superpowers. Its radar spun non-stop, spotting every move from the Russian Su-35s. The Hawkeye then passed that info straight to the Super Hornets and Growlers. The American jets didn't fight alone, they worked together like a pack of wolves. One Hornet chased a Russian jet from behind, another came in from the side. It was a classic trap. At the same time, the EA-18G Growler switched on its jamming gear. This created an electronic fog that confused the Russian pilot's radar. His screen filled with fake warnings and ghost missiles. While he struggled to figure out what was real, the American pilot stayed calm, guided by the Hawkeye's crystal-clear view of the battle. Russia wanted to show off its strength. Instead, it turned into a crash course in how to get embarrassed by electronic warfare. The whole fight didn't even last 30 minutes before Moscow tapped out. The mighty Marshal Ustinov, bristling with weapons, ended up stuck in what felt like a digital timeout chair. It slunk away, sending a radio message worthy of a stand-up routine patrol mission complete. Units withdrawing as planned. Up above the Ace, Su-35 pilots weren't beaten by missiles. They were beaten by empty fuel tanks and American patience. The Super Hornets flew circles around them while the Growlers kept tossing out electronic tricks like a magician pulling rabbits from hats. Russia came looking for glory and left looking like the blooper reel. The Russian pilots, outsmarted and cornered, finally gave up. They peeled off muttering into their helmets like gamers rage quitting a match and flew home. As for the Submarine Yasen-M, built to be a silent hunter, it ended up more like a clumsy escape artist. It limped away from the Lofoten Islands, tracked the whole time like a car with a GPS stuck on it. The message was clear: the ocean isn't nearly as dark when the U.S. Navy and its friends have the lights switched on. By 7:32 a.m., just almost 30 minutes after Russia's not-so-brilliant move, the fight was already finished. The Ford Carrier Strike Group didn't even need to use its full power. Russia came to a gunfight with a butter knife like bringing a flip phone to a smartphone convention, only to realize their opponent had an invisible, fully loaded cannon already locked on them. Game over before they even found the safety switch. And this wasn't just America flexing alone. The British and Norwegians joined in too, flying their Poseidons like teammates in a perfectly rehearsed play. Together, they built a surveillance net so tight across the North Atlantic that even a goldfish on vacation would have been spotted. For Moscow, it was less of a test and more of a costly lesson. What the US and NATO showed was simple: the Arctic and North Atlantic aren't places to play power games. Freedom of navigation isn't a debate, it's a rule. And if you insist on stirring trouble, don't expect a polite warning. Expect stealth jets, carrier groups, and electronic warfare that makes your radar appear glitchy like a video game from the 1990s. Holding back wasn't weakness, it was confidence. The kind of confidence that comes from knowing you can dominate every domain, sea, air, and electronic without even pulling the trigger. Sometimes proving you could win is more powerful than proving it with explosions. So was Russia trying a clever distraction? Or did they just pay for the world's priciest reminder of who runs the North Atlantic? Either way, the scoreboard was clear: U.S. Navy on top, Russia heading home empty-handed.